She arrived early that morning, long before most of the teachers had entered the building. The hallway was quiet, with only the sound of her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. She paused near the entrance, adjusted the strap of her worn handbag, and took a slow breath. The place felt heavy, not because it was unwelcoming by design, but because it carried years of pride, reputation, and unspoken rules about who belonged and who did not. She looked around carefully. Framed photos of award ceremonies lined the walls. People in the pictures were smiling confidently, dressed in elegant clothes, standing beside grand pianos and famous figures. She studied those faces for a moment, then looked down at her own hands. They were plain hands, slightly rough, shaped by years of work that had nothing to do with applause or bright stages. Still, her fingers moved slightly. As if remembering something old, a few teachers entered the hallway, talking among themselves. Their voices were loud and relaxed, full of comfort that comes from being in a place where one feels important. When they noticed her standing there, the conversation slowed. A quick glance passed between them. Their eyes moved from her shoes to her simple clothes, then to her quiet posture. "Are you lost?" One of them asked, not unkindly, but without much interest either. She shook her head gently. "No," she said. "I have an appointment." That answer surprised them slightly. Appointments were usually scheduled weeks in advance, and visitors often arrived with confidence, carrying documents, recommendations, or well-known names. She carried none of that. Just a small folder held close to her chest. They led her into a waiting room near the main music hall. The room was bright, with tall windows and a piano in the center covered with a protective cloth. Chairs were placed around it, facing inward, like silent judges, waiting for someone to prove themselves. As more teachers entered, the room slowly filled with soft laughter and casual talk. She sat quietly on one of the chairs near the wall. No one sat beside her. It wasn't intentional, but it happened naturally, as if space formed around her on its own. Some teachers whispered while looking in her direction. They didn't try hard to hide it. "She doesn't look like a student." One murmured, "Maybe she's from maintenance." Another replied with a small smile. Someone laughed quietly. Not loudly enough to seem rude, but loud enough to be heard. She heard every word. Still, her face didn't change. She had learned long ago that reacting never helped. Silence had become her shield. After a few minutes, a senior teacher entered and asked everyone to settle down. The meeting was about evaluating potential contributors for a special program. Performers, guest instructors, and consultants were being considered. It was a serious opportunity, and most people present believe they already belong there. When her turn came to introduce herself, the room shifted slightly. She stood up slowly, holding her folder. "I'm here for the piano evaluation," she said simply. The reaction was immediate. Some eyebrows rose. A few teachers exchanged looks. One of them let out a short laugh before catching himself. "The piano evaluation?" Someone repeated, as if they had misheard. "Yes," she replied. Calm and steady. Another teacher leaned back in his chair. "May we ask your background?" he said. His tone was polite, but his eyes carried doubt. She nodded. "I've played piano most of my life." That answer only increased the quiet amusement in the room. Most lifelong players arrived with confidence, introductions, and sometimes even followers. She arrived alone. "Where did you train?" A teacher asked. She hesitated for a brief moment, then answered honestly. "Mostly at home, and for some years under guidance." That wasn't the answer they expected. The teachers were used to hearing names of famous institutions, competitions, or mentors. Her words felt vague to them, almost evasive. One of them smiled thinly. "So, no formal certificates?" "No," she said. A soft chuckle moved through the room. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped it either. She stood there quietly, letting the moment pass. Her hands were steady, though her heart was not. Standing in that room brought back memories she had buried deep. Times when she had once sat confidently at a piano, when music was not a dream but a daily truth. Those memories felt far away now, like an old song heard through a wall. The senior teacher cleared his throat. "We usually reserve these evaluations for trained professionals," he said. You understand that, right? She nodded again. I understand. There was something in the way she said it that made the room slightly quieter. She wasn't begging. She wasn't offended. She simply accepted the reality of how she was being seen. I just asked for one chance, she added. That's all. The teachers looked at each other. Some were annoyed, some amused, and a few were curious. It wasn't common for someone like her to speak with such calm confidence. Most people, when faced with judgment, either defended themselves loudly or withdrew completely. She did neither. One teacher shrugged. It won't take long, he said. Let her try. Another smiled, clearly expecting nothing. Yes, why not? It could be entertaining. The word hung in the air. She heard it, but she didn't respond. Instead, she walked slowly toward the piano. As she moved, the room seemed to watch her more closely now. Her steps were careful, almost respectful, as if she didn't want to disturb the space. She reached the piano and paused. For a moment, she rested her hand lightly on the closed cover. That simple touch stirred something inside her. It reminded her of late nights long ago, practicing quietly so she wouldn't wake anyone. Of moments when music was the only place where she felt truly understood. She lifted the cover gently. The piano keys appeared clean and untouched, bright under the lights. She sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly. Her movements were natural, not rushed, not hesitant either. The teachers expected nervousness. They expected mistakes, hesitation, perhaps even embarrassment. Instead, what they saw was someone settling into a familiar place. She placed her hands above the keys, but didn't play yet. The room grew quieter. Not because they expected something great, but because curiosity had replaced laughter. Still, doubt remained strong. At that moment, before a single note was played, no one believed the laughter would soon disappear. No one imagined that the quiet woman they had judged would challenge their assumptions. She took a slow breath, and the room waited. She stayed seated at the piano, her hands still resting just above the keys. The silence in the room felt heavier than before. Some teachers leaned forward slightly, others crossed their arms. A few exchanged quiet looks as if already sure of how this would end. They were waiting, but not with hope. More with curiosity mixed with doubt. Before she began, one teacher spoke again. You can start whenever you're ready, he said, his tone neutral but distant. She nodded without looking back. Instead of playing right away, she lowered her hands to her lap. That small pause confused them. It wasn't nervousness. It felt intentional, like she was gathering something from deep inside rather than from the room. Around her, her mind drifted far from the music hall. She remembered a different time. Years ago, when mornings began with sound instead of silence. A small room. An old piano with chipped edges. Sunlight falling across the keys. Back then, music was not a test. It was comfort. It was the only place where life felt balanced. She remembered practicing until her fingers hurt, then practicing more. Not because someone forced her to, but because stopping felt impossible. Music had once been her voice. When she didn't know how to speak, but life didn't ask her what she wanted, responsibility arrived quietly. Like a knock at the door you can't ignore. Family needs. Financial pressure. Moments where choosing music felt selfish when others needed help. Slowly, the piano became something she visited less often. Then only at night. Then only in memory. Years passed. The world moved on. She worked jobs that paid bills but didn't feed the soul. She learned how to stay invisible, how to keep her head down, how to accept that dreams don't always survive adulthood, yet the music never truly left her, even when she cleaned houses. Even when she stood on long bus rides after work, melodies followed her. Her fingers would move without her noticing, tapping rhythms on her bag or along the edge of a table. Music lived quietly inside her, patient and waiting. Back in the hall, a teacher cleared his throat. Is everything okay? He asked. She lifted her head slightly. Yes, she said softly. I just needed a moment. That honesty disarmed them a little. It didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like someone respecting something fragile. She placed her hands back on the keys. Still, she did not play. Instead, she spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I know I don't look like what you expected," she said. "I know I don't have papers to show you. I understand if you think I don't belong here." The room shifted. This was not part of the process. Some teachers felt uncomfortable. Others listened closely. "I didn't come here to prove who I was," she continued. "I came because music has been a part of my life longer than anything else. Even when I walked away from it, it never walked away from me." No one laughed now. She didn't wait for permission after that. She didn't look at their faces. She let her fingers rest gently on the keys again, but still, she didn't start with a dramatic sound. She pressed one key, a single soft note filled the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. But it was clean, clear, intentional. Some teachers glanced up. She added another note. Then another. Slowly building a simple line. Nothing flashy. Nothing meant to impress. Just something honest. The teachers expected a mistake. A slip. Something that would confirm their doubts. Instead, the notes flowed steadily. She played like someone who wasn't performing for approval. She played like someone speaking to an old friend. The sound grew warmer. The melody deepened. Her fingers moved with ease, not stiffness. Each motion was controlled, natural, shaped by years of quiet discipline rather than recent practice. One teacher straightened in his chair, another leaned closer. His earlier smile fading, the music wasn't loud, but it filled the room completely. It carried emotion that didn't need explanation. There was sadness in it, but also strength. Loss, but also hope. It sounded like a life lived, not a lesson memorized. Her posture changed as she played. Her shoulders relaxed. Her face softened. It was as if the room disappeared and only the piano remained. She wasn't thinking about the teachers anymore. She wasn't thinking about judgment. She was remembering who she used to be before the world told her to be quiet. The melody shifted slightly, becoming richer. Her left hand added depth, grounding the sound. Her right hand moved with confidence, not rushing, not hesitating. A teacher who had laughed earlier now sat completely still. His eyes were fixed on her hands. Another whispered, "She's trained." Without realizing he spoke out loud. No one corrected him. The music continued, growing more expressive. It wasn't a famous piece that demanded recognition. It was something personal, shaped by memory and feeling. That made it harder to dismiss. Some teachers felt uncomfortable, not because the music was bad, but because it forced them to confront their assumptions. They had already decided who she was before she played a single note. As the final notes of the first section faded, the room remained silent. Not the awkward silence from before, but a different kind. One filled with attention. She didn't stop completely. She let the sound settle, then continued into a second movement. This time, the melody carried more confidence. It rose and fell, strong in some moments, gentle in others. Her fingers moved faster now, but never carelessly. Every note had purpose. One teacher felt a tightness in his chest. The music reminded him of why he had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. Before titles and pride got in the way. Another teacher felt something closer to shame. They realized she wasn't trying to impress them. She was simply being herself. As the piece came to a soft pause, she lifted her hands from the keys slowly. The final note hung in the air longer than expected. No one clapped. No one spoke. She remained seated, breathing quietly. In that moment, the balance of the room had changed. The laughter from earlier felt distant, almost unreal. The plain woman they had judged no longer fit the image they had created. She stood up calmly and stepped away from the piano, as if ready to leave. She didn't wait for approval. She didn't look for reactions. She had already said what she needed to say. Behind her, the teachers remained frozen, caught between disbelief and realization. Some wanted to ask questions. Others wanted to apologize. But none of them knew how to break the silence they had created. The woman picked up her bag and turned slightly toward the door before she could take another step. Someone finally spoke. "Please," a voice said, quieter than before. "Can you play a little more?" She stopped, not because she needed their validation, but because, For the first time that day, the request sounded sincere. She turned back toward the piano, and without a word she sat down again. She took a deep breath and let her fingers hover over the keys once more. The room was completely still now, the earlier whispers and chuckles gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. The teachers leaned forward slightly, unsure of what to expect. For the first time that day, they weren't judging her by her appearance, they were listening, waiting to see what she could truly do. Her hands began to move slowly at first, gently pressing the keys. Each note was soft, deliberate, and full of feeling. She didn't rush. She didn't try to show off. She let the music come naturally, letting the piano speak for her. The melody was simple at first, almost shy, but there was a depth to it. It carried memories and emotions that were hard to put into words. Every teacher in the room could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why. It wasn't just sound, it was a story, a life told in music. As she played, her posture relaxed. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing slowed, and for the first time in years, she felt free. The piano wasn't just an instrument under her fingers, it was a bridge to the life she had paused so long ago. She remembered nights spent practicing while the rest of the world slept. Mornings when sunlight touched the keys just right. And the quiet satisfaction of finally mastering a difficult piece. The teachers exchanged glances. Some of them tried to hide their surprise, but it was impossible. The woman they had underestimated, the one they had quietly mocked, was creating music that commanded respect. Her playing was not loud or showy, but it was precise, emotional, and full of control. Every movement of her fingers told a story. Every pause carried meaning. She closed her eyes for a moment as she shifted into a more complex section. Her fingers moved faster now, yet the notes never lost their clarity. She played with emotion, with intelligence, with a sense of purpose that could only come from years of dedication and practice. The room seemed to disappear around her. There were no teachers, no judgments, no whispers. Only the piano, the notes, and her memories. It was as if she had been transported back to the rooms of her youth, where music was all that mattered. The sound filled the hall, rich and full, yet delicate and nuanced. One teacher, who had been skeptical from the start, found himself leaning forward in disbelief. He had seen many students in his career, talented ones, brilliant ones even, but nothing like this. There was something alive in her playing, something that spoke directly to the heart. He felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of awe and regret for the way he had judged her so quickly. Another teacher, who had been quietly amused earlier, now sat rigid, unable to hide his astonishment. He realized that he had been completely wrong. Talent could not be measured by appearance, and experience could not always be judged by credentials. Here was someone whose life had taught her more about music and emotion than any classroom could. She didn't notice the reactions. She didn't need to. Her focus was entirely on the piano and the story she was telling through it. Each chord, each note, each pause carried pieces of her life struggles she had endured, sacrifices she had made, and quiet victories that no one had witnessed. As the music grew, it became more dynamic. Her left hand grounded the melody with steady, confident chords, while her right hand danced lightly, adding emotion and nuance. The room was filled with the richness of the sound, the complexity of the rhythm, and the depth of feeling. It was not just a performance. It was a confession, a revelation, and a reminder that true talent cannot be hidden forever. The teachers could feel the intensity building. They watched her hands move with precision, each finger knowing exactly where to go, each note carrying weight and meaning. They were witnessing something rare, someone who had lived a life intertwined with music. Someone whose connection to the piano was beyond technique or practice. Suddenly, she paused for a moment, her hands hovering above the keys. The silence was striking, not awkward, but filled with anticipation. Then, without warning, she shifted into a faster, more intricate section. Her fingers moved with speed and clarity, executing complex patterns that required both skill and instinct. The teacher's eyes widened as they followed the intricate movements. The woman's playing became more expressive. She added subtle variations in tempo, slight pauses, and changes in volume that made the music feel alive. Every note had purpose. Every rhythm told a story. She was no longer just playing. She was communicating without words, revealing herself through the piano. One teacher whispered under his breath, "I've never heard anyone play like this." Another nodded silently, unable to form words. The room was filled with awe and respect, the earlier judgment completely replaced by admiration. As the piece reached its climax, she allowed the music to soar. Her hands moved fluidly, each chord resonating deeply, each melody line clear and precise. The teachers could feel the emotion in every note. It was a powerful, moving experience, one that left them breathless and silent. Then almost as suddenly as it began, she slowed. The final notes were soft, gentle, and lingering. She let her hands rest lightly on the keys as the last sound faded into silence. The room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. The music had left a mark on everyone present. She opened her eyes and looked around. Her expression was calm, almost serene. She wasn't seeking praise or approval. She didn't need it. The music had said everything she wanted to say. It had told her story, expressed her struggles, and revealed her talent in a way words never could. The teachers were silent, stunned. They had expected a simple performance, maybe a mistake, perhaps even an embarrassment. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. A quiet, plain-looking woman had transformed the room with her playing. She had captured their attention, their respect, and their admiration, all without a single word beyond her introduction. For the first time that day, the hierarchy in the room shifted. The teachers realized that true talent cannot be judged by appearance, by clothing, or by background. It exists in those who dedicate themselves to their craft, who pour their life into their art, and who allow their experiences to shape the way they create. She stood quietly after the performance, letting the silence speak for itself. There was no need for applause. There was no need for recognition. The teachers had already understood what mattered most, that she was someone who had lived through music, who had been shaped by it, and who could communicate through it in a way that no one else could. As she walked toward her bag to leave, the room remained still. The teachers looked at each other, some in disbelief, some with new respect, and a few with a sense of regret for the way they had judged her earlier. She had not only played the piano. She had transformed their understanding of talent, humility, and life itself. Her fingers had spoken louder than any words ever could. And in that moment, every teacher in the room knew that they had been given a rare gift, a glimpse of someone extraordinary, someone who had survived life's challenges and still found a way to express her soul through music. The woman paused at the door, her expression calm and composed. She did not turn back. She did not ask for applause. She simply left, leaving behind a room full of teachers who would never forget the sound of her fingers on the keys. The story she had told, and the quiet power of someone who had lived a life shaped by music. The silence lingered long after she had gone. The teachers remained seated, absorbing what had happened, understanding that their assumptions had been wrong. They had laughed too soon, judged too quickly. And now, in the aftermath, they could only reflect on the lesson she had given them without ever speaking another word. And somewhere in the quiet of that hall, the echo of her music remained, a reminder that true talent does not need validation, that strength can be found in quiet resilience, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are told not by the loudest voices, but by the ones who have endured, survived, and quietly mastered their craft. Her performance was over, but its impact would stay with them forever. They had seen a woman, plain in appearance, reveal a lifetime of dedication, sacrifice, and skill in a way that left no room for doubt. The teachers had laughed at her at first, but now all they could do was respect the story her fingers had told. The room remained silent for a long moment after she had finished playing. The notes lingered in the air, soft and fading, leaving behind a heavy sense of awe. The teachers sat frozen in their seats, their previous judgments stripped away by what they had just heard. It was as if the music had peeled back the layers of pretense and pride that filled the room, leaving only honesty, talent, and human emotion. Finally, one of the senior teachers cleared his throat. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of authority. That was remarkable, he said, choosing his words carefully. May I ask where you learned to play like that? She looked up at him calmly, her expression neutral. I had a teacher a long time ago, she said softly. It was a strict mentor, someone who demanded everything from me. I studied under them for years. The teacher nodded slowly, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Years of study under a mentor? At a professional level, I assume? She hesitated for a moment. It was not hesitation born of uncertainty, but of memory. Those years had been some of the most intense and defining in her life, but they had also ended abruptly. Yes, she said finally. But circumstances forced me to leave. I had to step away from music for a long time. Life required me to focus elsewhere. A murmur went around the room. Some of the teachers exchanged glances, realization dawning in their eyes. The quiet woman they had underestimated, the one who seemed plain and unassuming, had once trained at a professional level. She had sacrificed her dreams for life's responsibilities. One of the younger teachers leaned forward, curiosity overtaking caution. Why didn't you continue? He asked gently. With that kind of talent. She smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and acceptance in her eyes. Because sometimes life doesn't give you the choice you want. Family needed me. Work needed me. And I had to make a decision. Music had to wait. The room was quiet again. This time, the silence was not about awe or surprise, it was filled with understanding. The teachers began to see the woman in a new light, not as someone plain or unremarkable, but as someone who had carried immense skill quietly. Without seeking recognition, one senior teacher stood up and approached her cautiously. I must admit, he said, his tone sincere, we underestimated you. I don't know what we expected, but it was not this. You have the depth and control of someone who has studied the craft for decades. She nodded politely but did not speak. Her humility was natural. She had never played for recognition. She played because it was a part of her life, a part of her identity, and because she could not stop herself from expressing it. Another teacher, who had laughed earlier, now looked ashamed. I didn't believe you at first, he admitted quietly. I thought maybe you weren't serious. She gave him a small, gentle smile. I understand, she said softly. I know I don't look like what people expect when they think of a professional pianist. The senior teacher looked around the room. Everyone, he said, I think we need to recognize that we were wrong. Not just in underestimating her, but in judging by appearances, by assumptions, by first impressions. Heads nodded slowly around the room. The teachers were realizing something important. Talent, dedication, and experience could not always be measured by certificates, appearances, or the confidence someone projected. The woman had carried her skill quietly, waiting for the moment to show it, not for fame or recognition. But because it was a part of who she was, she returned to the piano briefly, almost instinctively, and played a short, soft piece, something simple, gentle, and full of emotion. It was not meant to impress anyone. It was simply a reminder of the story she had lived. The teachers watched silently, absorbing not only the music but the person behind it. The senior teacher spoke again. May I ask something personal? He said carefully. Why did you step away for so long? Such talent. It's rare to see someone with your control and depth. She paused, thinking about how much of her life had been devoted to things other than music. Because life demanded it, she said finally. I have responsibilities, obligations that could not wait. I wanted to continue, but I had to make choices. Music was something I loved, but I also had to live. And living meant sometimes stepping away from the things you love the most. The honesty in her words resonated deeply with everyone present. They had witnessed not only her skill, but her life story, told without boasting, without exaggeration, and without complaint. She had simply lived, survived, and remained true to herself. A young teacher, still in disbelief, asked softly, Do you plan to return to music now? She considered the question. I didn't come here for recognition, she said. I came here because music is part of me. If there is a place where I can contribute or where I can play again, I will. but not for anyone else, only because it is who I am." The senior teacher nodded. "Then I think we should offer you that chance," he said. "You deserve it, not because we say so, but because your life and your talent have earned it." The other teachers murmured in agreement. There was a sense of humility in the room now, a quiet respect that had replaced all the earlier laughter and doubt. They had seen someone judged unfairly, someone underestimated, and they had witnessed her quiet brilliance. The woman stood up again, not seeking approval, not looking for applause. She had already spoken with her music and with her honesty. The teachers, now fully aware of her story and talent, felt a collective sense of regret for their earlier assumptions, but also admiration for her resilience and dedication. One of the teachers approached and extended a hand. "We were wrong," he said. "You have our respect, and we would be honored if you accepted an opportunity to share your talent with this institute." She looked at him, then at the others in the room, and smiled faintly. "I will," she said softly. "Not for recognition, but because music has always been a part of my life, and it deserves to be shared." In that moment, the atmosphere of the room changed completely. The teachers had learned a valuable lesson. Appearances can be deceiving, and talent is not always visible at first glance. They had laughed at her at the start, underestimated her, and even doubted her abilities. But now, they understood the depth of her experience, the discipline she had cultivated, and the strength she had shown by surviving life's challenges while holding on to her passion. She moved through the room with quiet dignity, no arrogance, no boastfulness. Her presence alone reminded everyone that true skill and resilience are often hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The senior teacher spoke again, his voice filled with genuine respect. "Your story, your music, it's a reminder to all of us that life shapes us in ways we cannot always see, and talent, when nurtured and lived, never truly fades." She nodded, accepting the words but not letting them define her. She had never sought validation, only the chance to express herself through music. Today she had done that, and the acknowledgement from others was secondary. The room, once filled with judgment and laughter, now held admiration and quiet respect. The teachers had seen someone extraordinary, someone who had survived life's challenges, who had carried her talent in silence, and who had finally shared it with the world in her own time and on her own terms. She had shown them that appearances can mislead, that humility and quiet strength often mask brilliance, and that true talent speaks louder than words ever could. And as she prepared to leave, the teachers knew that this moment would stay with them forever. The day a woman, plain in appearance but extraordinary in skill and resilience, reminded them of what really matters: dedication, honesty, and the courage to follow your passion, no matter the obstacles. The woman walked slowly through the hall, her footsteps quiet but steady. She carried herself with calm dignity, aware of the attention that followed her, but not letting it distract her. The teachers remained in their seats, still absorbing everything that had happened. Their laughter and doubt from earlier felt like a distant memory now, replaced by respect and a newfound humility. She paused for a moment near the piano, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time in years. It was not just an instrument. It was a part of her life that had waited patiently for her return. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch. Memories of long nights, of struggles and quiet triumphs came flooding back. This was more than just a piano. It was a companion, a witness to her journey, and now, a bridge to a future she had once thought lost. The senior teacher stepped forward cautiously. "We would be honored if you would consider joining our program," he said gently. "We can offer you a position where you can play, teach, and share your talent. You have earned this not because we say so, but because your life and skill demand recognition." She looked at him, her expression calm. She did not need their approval to know her worth. But she also recognized the opportunity to reconnect with something she had loved deeply, to finally step back into a world that had once been closed to her. "I will," she said softly. "I want to share music again, not for recognition, but because it is part of who I am. It is what I have carried all these years, quietly, and I am ready to let it live again." The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The teachers who had once underestimated her now looked at her with admiration. They realized that the quiet woman they had mocked had taught them an important lesson. Talent and resilience are often hidden beneath the surface. And true brilliance cannot be measured by appearances alone. One of the younger teachers approached, hesitating slightly. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I judged you too quickly. I didn't realize." She smiled gently. "It is understandable," she said. "People often make judgments before they see the whole story. I am not angry. I only hope that my music speaks for itself and that it reminds everyone here that patience and understanding matter." Another teacher, the one who had laughed at her earlier, now looked thoughtful. "We learned something important today," he admitted. "We saw that appearances can be deceiving, that talent can remain hidden, and that dedication, even when silent, is powerful." She nodded, accepting their words with quiet grace. She had not come for apologies. She had come for a chance to reconnect with music. The recognition and respect she received now were simply the natural result of the truth being revealed. As she prepared to leave the room, she walked past the teachers who now stood to see her off. Their expressions were a mix of awe, humility, and respect. They understood that her journey had been long and difficult, and that her talent had survived because of her dedication, not because of external validation. She paused one last time near the piano, turning to face the room. Her eyes swept across the teachers, each of whom had witnessed her story unfold through her music. She spoke softly, but her voice carried a quiet authority. "Music is not about recognition. It is about honesty, dedication, and the courage to follow what is inside you. I hope you remember that." With that, she turned and walked out of the hall, leaving behind a space transformed. The laughter, the doubt, the casual judgment, it was all gone. In its place was respect, understanding, and a deep appreciation for something rare and extraordinary. Outside, the sunlight fell warmly on her face. She felt a lightness she had not felt in years. The weight of doubt, both from herself and from others, had lifted. She had faced judgment, stayed true to herself, and reclaimed the part of her life that had been waiting patiently. Music had returned to her hands, and with it a sense of freedom and fulfillment. She knew the journey was not over. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to make, and moments of doubt to face. But she also knew that she had proven something to herself, something no one could take away. Her talent, her resilience, and her voice through music were hers alone, and they had survived everything life had thrown at her. Back in the hall, the teachers remained seated, reflecting on what they had witnessed. They realized that they had been given a rare gift, the chance to see someone extraordinary reveal herself not through words, but through art, discipline, and quiet strength. The lesson was clear: never judge based on appearances, and always be open to the depth that may lie hidden within people. The senior teacher spoke softly, almost to himself. "We were wrong," he said. "Completely wrong. And now we have been shown what true talent and dedication really look like." Others nodded in agreement. They felt a mix of humility, admiration, and inspiration. They had learned something they would carry with them forever: the courage to persevere, the strength to remain humble, and the truth that brilliance can exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Far down the street, the woman walked with her bag over her shoulder, each step steady and calm. She did not rush, and she did not look back. She had proven nothing to anyone except herself, and that was enough. Her life had been shaped by responsibility, by sacrifices, and by quiet perseverance. Today, she had reclaimed a part of herself that had always been there, waiting. Her mind drifted to the music she would play next, to the melodies she would teach, and to the lives she might touch with her passion. She understood now that sharing her talent was not about recognition. It was about connecting with others through something that spoke beyond words, something that could touch hearts and inspire minds. She paused at a small park, hearing children laughing in the distance. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to enjoy the simple beauty of life. Music had returned to her, yes, but so had a sense of peace and completeness. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, and yet she had stayed true to herself. And now she was free to continue her journey with integrity, skill, and courage. That day she had taught more than just music. She had taught humility, patience, and resilience, not through lectures or speeches, but through action and example. The teachers, once skeptical, would remember her not just for her talent, but for the quiet strength that allowed her to rise above judgment and reclaim her place in the world of music. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the street, she walked with a quiet smile. The piano, the hall, and the teachers were behind her, but the lessons she had shared and the strength she had shown would stay with them, and with her forever. She knew life would continue with its challenges. But for the first time in years, she felt the joy of being fully herself. Her talent was no longer hidden. Her voice had been heard, and her story, told through music and lived through patience, resilience, and dedication, had finally been recognized not for fame or praise, but for its own truth. And with that, she walked forward, ready for whatever came next, carrying her music, her experience, and her quiet strength into the future she had earned.